Dust swirled like whispers over the broken trail, catching the last gold of the setting sun. The windmill turned slow, its old bones creaking out the rhythm of another lonesome day. Far off, the lowing of cattle wandered through the silence, and the only house in sight leaned slightly eastward, weather-beaten but standing tall, same as the man inside it. Cash and Rose sat hunched near a flickering oil lamp, eyes tracing the same page he'd read 3 nights before, lips moving now and then, not for reading's sake, but memories. He'd read the same book a dozen times. Weren't about the words anymore, just the comfort of holding something that didn't change. Birch, the old shepherd mix, lay curled at his feet, one ear twitching at every settling board. Outside, the sky had lost its color, and the kind of hush only found in wild country wrapped around the house like a prayer. The ranch was quiet tonight, the same quiet it had held for 5 years, since the fire took Eli, his brother, his blood. Same fire that left Cashin with a half-healed burn of his left arm, and a guilt that couldn't be rubbed out with whiskey or hard work. Each day since, Cashin kept a rhythm. Rise with the sun. Feed the horses. Mend the fences. Patch boots. Cook beans. Sweep the same porch he never sat on. He didn't speak unless Birch was listening, and even then it was mostly things like stew's on, or weather's gonna turn. The silence had become more than habit. It was a room he lived inside, worn soft and shaped to fit him. Inside his modest home, relics hung like ghosts. A pale blue dress, never worn, hung on a bent nail by the window. A child's rocking horse sat near the hearth, never rocked. In the small drawer of his bedside table, a letter sealed but never opened, its edges yellowed, edges soft. Cashin didn't look at it anymore. Didn't have to. Its weight lived in his bones. Out by the cottonwood tree, a silver ring lay buried under the earth. He remembered the sound it made when he dropped it, like a coin into a wishing well. No wish had come from it, only the years. He hadn't expected company in over 2 winters, and the last time it came, it had been a lost cowhand asking directions and never saying thanks. That was fine with Cashin. Folks had their lives. He had the land. But something was different that night. Just past supper, a drizzle began to patter on the roof, slow and even, not storming, just the kind of rain that made old men dream of things they couldn't fix. Birch sat up first, his ears perked, nose twitching. Cashin looked up from the lamp's flicker. Then it came. A knock. Light. Almost curious. He didn't move. Wind, maybe, or a branch brushing too near. He waited, ears sharpening like a deer in brush. Then came the second knock. Slower. Weak. Cashin stood, his boots dragging against the floorboards, creaking like old wood in pain. Birch followed, tail stiff. The rain made halos on the porch lantern as Cashin pulled open the door. She was there. Rain had plastered her hair to her face. Dark strands stuck to skin gone pale. Her dress, once maybe fine, was torn at the shoulder and clung to her frame like a shroud. Blood trickled from a gash near her temple, mixing with rain, dripping down the side of her neck. In one hand, she clutched a child satchel, a worn thing, stitched with love and dirt streaked from travel. She didn't speak, didn't cry, just stood there, eyes unfocused, chest rising in shallow gasps. A woman emptied of all but instinct, the way an animal walks into the barn right before dying. Cashin stared. Time moved thick and slow. Then her knees buckled. He caught her before she hit the floor. His hands, and used a touch, hesitated at first, then steadied, one beneath her back, the other catching her wrist, small and cold and trembling. Her head rested against his chest for a brief second, and in that moment something inside Cashin cracked. Not loud, not sharp, just a soft, painful shift, like old wood finally giving beneath weight too long carried. She didn't say a word. Neither did he. The rain sang on. Birch whined low in his throat. Cashin looked down at the woman in his arms, her skin pale against his sun-scarred hands. And without quite understanding why, he whispered to no one in particular, "All right then, you're safe." And for the first time in years, he stepped backward through his own door, not alone. Rain tapped its slow lullaby across the tin roof, steady as breath. The world beyond the window blurred into soft gray, sky kissing earth with gentle sorrow. Inside the room, the lantern glowed gold, casting long shadows on the wood panel walls. The fire had dwindled to embers, but warmth lingered in the way quiet sometimes did. Mara lay in the bed, body curled like a leaf too long in wind. Clean linens tucked around her shoulders. Her dark hair spread across the pillow in damp waves. A faint bruise colored the ridge of her cheek. The gash on her temple had been washed and bandaged. Sleep held her, not in peace, but in exhaustion. At the foot of the bed, Birch lay sentinel, ears flicking now and then, as if listening to dreams. Beside them, Cashin sat on a stool, back straight, fingers slow and methodical as they polished the brass base of a lantern. He didn't glance her way. His gaze was fixed somewhere else entirely, somewhere beyond the walls, beyond the moment, where memories lived in hush. When Mara stirred with a whimper, his hands paused. Her eyes snapped open, wild with panic. She sat up too fast, gasping. Her arms flailed weakly for the edge of the bed. Cashin rose, calm but unreadable. "You're all right," he said, voice low and steady as creek water. She shook her head, mumbling something broken. One leg swung over the side. She tried to stand, but her knees crumpled beneath her. He caught her again, a habit already forming. "You'll stay," he said, easing her back onto the mattress, "till you can stand without falling." She looked up at him then, truly looked. Her lips parted like she might speak, but no words came, only a faint nod, as if she were giving in to more than just weakness. And so began the quiet days. Mara moved like someone learning the shape of her own shadow again. She spoke little, ate slowly, tended to her torn dress with neat stitches by the window, her fingers moving with practiced care. In the mornings, she'd boil potatoes and leave 2 on the windowsill, one for herself, one for Birch. Cashin never hovered, never asked. He did small things instead. A bench appeared beneath the old cottonwood tree, smooth-sanded, sturdy. A small steaming mug would sit by her door some mornings, never announced. Birch followed her around like a shadow with a wagging tail, sitting when she sat, curling up when she knelt to gather eggs from the hens. She would watch Cashin from the window, sometimes. Watch how he moved through his tasks, slow and sure, as if each nail hammered or fence mended stitched him closer to some inner silence. He never hurried, never raised his voice. The land bent around him like it knew him well and bore no grudge. It was on the 5th morning, when frost had gathered along the edge of the porch rail, that she finally spoke more than a word. "My name's Mara," she said, eyes fixed on the rising steam of her coffee. Cashin just nodded, like he'd known all along. Nothing more was said. That evening, old Ada came by, wrapped in a green shawl and carrying a loaf of brown bread still warm from her stove. "Saw smoke from your chimney," she said, stepping in without asking, "and thought to see if you'd finally gone and found yourself a ghost for company." She turned her weathered face toward Mara, eyes narrowing slightly, not in judgment but recognition. "She's got the look of someone who's run far and lost more," Ada murmured, mostly to herself. Later, over coffee, Ada sat in the kitchen and talked like she always had, half to Cashin, half to the walls. She spoke of his mother, long past, of the girl Cashin once planned to marry before the trail west claimed her, of how Eli was always the louder brother, the brave one, but Cashin had the steadier hands. When Ada left, she gave Mara a soft smile and touched her arm. "Don't matter where you came from, child," she said. "Only matters if you're staying." That night, Mara dreamed in fragments. Fire roaring. A man's voice slurred and angry. The sharp sound of a door slamming. The distant sob of a child. Then silence. She woke with cries strangled in her throat, damp with sweat. Cashin, still up by the fireplace, turned slightly, but he didn't ask, didn't rise. He only murmured to Birch, and the dog padded over to her side, curling close. The next day, she joined him in the field. He was repairing the north fence, where the rails had warped from the last freeze. She stood nearby, holding a bundle of nails. Her dress, though mended, still bore stains that wouldn't wash out. Her hands trembled slightly, but she held the tool steady. When their fingers brushed, passing a nail, she pulled back quick. But then, after a beat, she offered again. Cashin took it. Some things don't splinter when they break, he said quietly, gaze fixed on the post. Just bend a while. They worked until the sun dipped low, speaking little, but breathing the same dust. In the evening, she sat on the cottonwood bench, watching the sky paint itself in bruised orange and indigo. Birch lay at her feet, chewing lazily on a stick. Cashin stepped onto the porch, wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't join her, just watched. She turned to him, eyes half hidden beneath loose strands of wind-blown hair. "Why haven't you asked who I am?" she asked softly, like the question had weighed on her ribs too long. Cashin leaned against the porch post, arms crossed, voice slow as dusk. "Figure you'll tell me," he said, when it stopped sudden to say it. And in that moment, something passed between them, like the space between two long-lost notes finally forming a song. Not whole yet, but almost. Morning spilled soft light through the kitchen window, staining the walls honey-colored. The air smelled of coffee and wood smoke, and the floor creaked beneath bare feet. Mara stood at the counter, hair loose down her back, sleeves rolled up, pouring dark roast into 2 tin mugs. Her hands, once trembling, now moved with quiet purpose. Steady, sure. Cashin watched from the threshold, arms folded. He didn't speak, just stood there for a breath longer than he should have, taking the way she leaned ever so slightly to the right when she poured, the way her eyes softened when she looked at Birch circling her feet. Something ached in his chest, something wordless. Before she turned, he stepped away. They drank their coffee on the porch, side by side, not quite touching. The cottonwood leaves whispered above them. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried, circling the canyon beyond the pasture. Later, she found him fixing a saddle cinch near the barn and sat down on the hay bale beside him, folding her hands in her lap. "His name was Emmett Kane," she said after a long stretch of silence. Cashin kept working, but slower now. He was handsome, had a mouth full of lies and a gambler's grin. "I was 17 and thought that meant danger was the same thing as love." She paused, watching her own fingers. "By the time I knew different, I had 2 boys and a bruise for every mile he dragged us across." Cashin said nothing, just kept threading the leather, listening. Jonah was 6 when the fever came for his brother. I prayed like I knew how. Emmett didn't. Said it was my fault, that I was cursed. He drank more after that, got meaner. One night, he pulled a knife on a card shark in Wyoming territory. Died in the alley. Her voice cracked like an old fence post. She didn't wipe her eyes. Rogan, Emmett's brother, took Jonah, said I had lost the right to him. Said a woman who couldn't save one boy didn't deserve another. Cashin's hand stilled. They left me by the creek. Took my son. Left me with blood in my mouth and the sound of Jonah screaming for me. She leaned forward, her breath shaking. I ran until my shoes split apart. Didn't care where I was going. Just not there. And one night in the dark, I saw a light in the distance. That windmill of yours spinning against the sky, like it had something to say. And I knocked. Cashin let the moment settle between them. Then he spoke, slow. "My brother died in a barn fire 5 winters ago. I lit the lamp, went back to the house. Thought I'd come right back. But I got a reading. Took too long. By the time I smelled the smoke..." He looked down at his hands, the burn scars that never fully faded. I pulled him out, but it wasn't enough. I told myself I'd stay here, keep the land running, make it right somehow. But truth is, I stayed because I didn't know how to be anywhere else. She looked at him then, not with pity, but something deeper, something shared. That evening, she walked into the sitting room and found him with a photo in his hands. The corners were curled, the faces faded. A man and a woman in old-fashioned wedding clothes. Young, hopeful, frozen in a future that never came. "She was supposed to meet me in Kansas," he said. "We were going to build a life out here. But her wagon got caught up in the Apache Wars. Never made it." He placed the photograph face down on the mantel. They ate soup in silence, the fire crackling soft behind them. At one point, her hand reached across the table, fingertips brushing his wrist. "You never stopped waiting," she said, barely above a whisper. Cashin looked at her, his voice low. Maybe I was just waiting for someone who knew what loss sounds like in the morning. That night, the stars pressing close over the house, the sky clear and deep. Ada arrived the next day with a bundle of herbs, and news carried on grit. Saw someone in town I hoped I never would again, she said to Mara when Cashin stepped out to check the corral. Rogan Kane, mean as his brother ever was. Meaner maybe. Travels with 2 other men now. Don't pay with money. Pays with bruises and broken doors. Mara's face turned to stone, but her hands curled into her skirt. Ada touched her shoulder. If he's looking for you, you ought to be ready. Mara nodded once. Slow, when the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the prairie, Cashin found her by the cottonwood bench. She sat with satchel in her lap, one he'd seen the night she arrived, worn and stitched with fading thread. Inside, she pulled out a small, carved wooden horse. Simple, unfinished, a child's carving. Jonah made this with Emmett's pocket knife, she said, voice like wind through dry grass. He gave it to me the day before they took him. Cashin took it gently, running his fingers along the edges. I found this, he said, pulling something from his coat, in the barn rafters 2 weeks back. Didn't know what it was then. Thought maybe it fell off a wagon long ago. But now, he handed her a folded piece of paper, a crumpled child's drawing, a house with a red roof, a stick-figure woman with long hair, a boy, a dog, a man with a hat. Mara held it to her chest like it might break. If I stay, she whispered, tears streaking her cheeks, I want to be more than something broken you took out of mercy. Cashin looked at her. Something in his eyes thawed now. I never took you in, Mara. You walked in, and the silence left with you. And there, under the cottonwood tree that had seen 5 winters of stillness, 2 people broken by fire and lost sat side by side, the wind carrying the scent of rain on distant hills, and the promise of something unspoken blooming slow between them. The wind came early that morning, riding hard across the plains, tugging dust up in spirals like smoke signals meant for the dead. The sky had that strange copper tint, the kind that warned of more than weather, the kind that whispered of reckoning. Cashin stood on the porch, coffee untouched in his hand, watching the line where earth met sky. A figure appeared there, then another, then a third. The windmill spun too fast, its creaking groan stretching like a scream across the empty land. Birch stood stiff at Cashin's side, low growl already rising from his chest. Inside, Mara watched through the window, her hand tightening around the mug she hadn't yet brought to her lips. She knew that gait, that slouch in the saddle. Even from this far, the memory of it wrapped around her like a noose. Rogan Kane. He hadn't aged so much as soured. His face, from what could be seen beneath the brim, held the slack cruelty of a man who believed nothing could touch him. The 2 men riding with him bore the look of hired fists, silent, flat-eyed, always scanning. Cashin stepped off the porch slow, boots crunching dry dirt. The riders came to a halt 10 yards out. Rogan didn't dismount. He just grinned down at Cashin like he was something caught in a trap too small to matter. I heard you were keeping something of mine, Rogan said, voice thick as tar. Cashin's jaw flexed. Ain't nothing here that belongs to you. Oh, see, that ain't how debt works, Rogan said, spitting dust to one side. Emmett left this world owing more than cards. Family pays. That's the rule. I'll pay you what you think you're owed, Cashin said evenly, hand never touching his belt, never rising to meet violence. Take the money and go. Rogan laughed. It wasn't loud. It was cold. This ain't about money. This is about what's mine. From behind the doorframe, Mara stepped out, shoulders straight, eyes calm. Then take me, she said, the words like stone across water. Just leave him be. Cashin turned fast, his face thunderstruck. Mara, don't. I ain't watching another good man burn for me, she said, her voice breaking at the edge. If this is a price, I'll pay it. Rogan grinned. Knew you'd remember your place. Cashin stepped between them. No, he said. Rogan blinked. Beg pardon? Cashin's voice was low, but steady. No more running. Not from men like you. And not from yourself either, he added. glancing back at Mara. She stared at him like she'd never seen him before. Not the man who fixed fences and rode quiet, but someone standing tall against fire. Old Ada arrived then, in her wagon with her rifle resting across her lap like it was part of her spine. She parked sideways to the house, silent, just watching, with her cane Lem, a quiet ranch hand from downriver, who owed Cashin a favor and showed up with a shovel in one hand and no questions. A standoff settled. No one moved, not truly. It wasn't about the guns. It was about who would blink first. Rogan didn't blink. He lit a match, tossed it into the barn's dry hay, and smiled as the flames caught. Cashin didn't hesitate. He ran. The barn cracked with heat and smoke, animals screaming inside. Mara called out, but Cashin was already through the doors. The past roared around him, with snapping, fire clawing up the walls, just like that night 5 years ago. Only this time he didn't freeze. He kicked down stall doors, let the horses bolt out into the open. He unlatched the goat pen, released the hens, dragged a burning beam off a calf's stall door with nothing but his shoulder and rage. And when he came out, coughing, singed, soaked and swept alive, Mara ran to him. She threw her arms around him, sobbing into his shirt. "You saved what you once let burn," she whispered. Behind them, Rogan shifted in the saddle, uneasy now. His men weren't laughing. Ada had her rifle pointed straight at his chest. "Looks like the game's changed," she said. Rogan sneered. "You think I'm scared of an old crone with a pop gun?" But he didn't see Mara. She stepped behind him, iron rod in hand, the one she used to stir the fire. With one clean swing, she cracked it against the side of his head. He dropped like a sack of rotten wheat. One of the riders fled. The other held up his hands and dismounted. By the time the sheriff arrived, dusty, out of breath, looking like he'd heard the devil rode east. Ada had already bound Rogan's wrists with saddle rope. The sheriff looked down at him, then at Mara. "Guess the Kane legacy's over now," he muttered. "About damn time." They buried the ashes of the barn together. Lem brought nails and Ada baked a pie, and though it wasn't spoken aloud, it felt like a gathering, like something new had started in the ruins. That night, Mara opened Jonah's satchel. Inside, beneath a threadbare shirt and a faded kerchief, was a folded piece of paper, a drawing, crude and hopeful, a house with a red roof, a tall man with a hat, a woman with a long dress, a dog, a cottonwood tree. She wept, not from sorrow, but from something closer to home. Weeks passed. The wind softened. Grass grew where the barn once stood. Cashin built a new one with hands steadier than ever. Birch slept more often on the porch, belly round with peace. One morning, as the sun filtered warm through trees, Mara handed him a bundle wrapped in brown cloth. He opened it slow. A shirt, stitched clean and strong, the color of dusk, soft cotton, and a note for the man who made silence feel safe again. Cashin looked up, eyes full of something old and new. Mara stood on the porch steps, sunlight touching her hair. "If you still want to be alone," she said quietly, "I'll go." He stepped forward. "I don't want to be alone," he said, voice barely a breath. "Not anymore. Not ever again." And in that quiet space between their words, the windmill slowed, the porch creaked in welcome, and the land, once silent, began to hum with life once more.